Alrighty guys, welcome back. I've got a new helicopter today, kind of new. This is the Blade 300 CFX. Another one of those helis that I found that was quite abused, and I got it fixed up and ready to roll. This heli is about 10 years old. I think this might have been one of the very first CFX models, if not the first. I don't know, but it's definitely an earlier CFX line. So it's basically just a Blade 300X, but with a carbon fiber frame and aluminum head and all that good stuff. So it's a more modern 300X. The servo geometry is much better, and it's built very similar to what you'd see today. So I'm using the stock ESC, which is a little 25 amp E-Flight ESC, which is the biggest 25 amp ESC I've ever seen. It's absolutely huge. So that's going to have to go. I'm going to replace that with a Talon 25. It's the same motor, which is a 320 sized motor, which is what used to come in the 453Ds. These servos are the little translucent cased plastic geared cyclic and tail servos. They do have aluminum horns on them though, which is pretty neat actually. Put an IC3 on the ESC, and the way this model came out of the factory was they actually would run the ESC cables out the front of the chassis and zip tie them down the side, which looked terrible. And definitely not doing that. So I cut down all of those ESC wire, all that extra length, and just turned the wires 180 degrees and plugged them directly into the motor. So you have a super clean setup, which is the way it should have been done from the factory. Originally, this helicopter came with an AR-7210, or I'm sorry, an AR-7200. But the person who owned this at some point took that off and replaced it with an open stock AR-7210. So that's a huge upgrade. So this is not what came with it. It's completely open stock. You could put it on any helicopter. So I did a fresh setup on it with 12 degrees pitch, and everything else is pretty much generic. I did turn the RPMs down. I'm not running 100% RPMs because this thing just, it's painful to listen to this thing try to turn that many RPMs. Not really for me. And yeah, it's a pretty nice little helicopter. It's absolutely mint. It's the only 300 CFX I've seen in years in this condition. Of course, I rebuilt it. I replaced the belt on it, and anything that needed replacing, I did it. Everything came apart and was cleaned. I did have to shim the head. I built the head exactly how the manual shows it, but there was way too much wiggle in the grips. So I ended up having to put some shims in there. Let me know if you've ran into that issue as well. Maybe the exploded view isn't showing the shims that were supposed to be in there. I'm not sure, but there was way too much wiggle. I've never had a helicopter with that much movement in the grip, so I pretty much figured that wasn't right. Ended up shimming it, and there's a little bit of movement, but it's not bad. There's no vibrations. I did a pretty quick and dirty setup on it when I did this. Threw the pitch gauge on, got everything good but not perfect, and I'm gonna fly it. So cool little carbon vertical fin. Very similar tail setup to what you see even today, but it is a neat little helicopter. I've got a 1300 3S there, and there's no safe or anything like that on this. It's just a regular AR-7210. Like I said, 12 degrees pitch. Kind of wish I might actually go in there and put more. I'm not sure what they really rate this helicopter for, but I might jump up to 13 or something. Maybe 12 and a half. Pretty little helicopter though. I mean, it's all right looking. Cool. Let's fly it. See how it goes. And as with all older helicopters that I rebuild, parts are scarce. You can't buy a lot of the parts anymore. For instance, you can't get feathering spindles or feathering shafts or whatever for this anymore. So for that reason right there, flying this thing hard and taking risks, it's just not gonna happen. It's gonna be a super easy flight. Nothing crazy, very light 3D, because if I crash it, then there's a mint 300 CFX gone. And for people who say that Blade still keeps their helicopters running, they don't. Here's an example. Here's a pretty modern helicopter. They don't even make feathering or feathering shafts anymore. One of the most important parts to make. They don't make belts anymore. So yeah, they may have the chassis for it, but really what good is that gonna do if you can't get a feathering spindle or shaft, whatever? Now, one thing I've noticed with this little heli It's got a very bad tendency to be tail heavy. Apologize for the wind noise. It's pretty breezy out here today. So if you notice that 3S that I have in there, which is the recommended battery, I have it hanging off the battery tray. And that's just because even at that, you know, I've got the battery as far forward as I can get it. It's still tail heavy. And it feels tail heavy as well. So if you've also had that experience, I've never flown one of these until literally a week ago. And it flies pretty good. That's just some cruising, very low RPMs. And even at these very, very low RPMs, much lower than what they have in the manual, you can see that this thing has no vibration going on. Absolutely 100% smooth. Don't really care for the ESC. Its governing is very weird. It doesn't govern very well, if at all. I don't really know if this ESC governs or not, but and I'll tell you something else, even with the swash movement, the cyclic movement turned all the way up, you know, as far as I could get it before binding took place. There's just not a lot of cyclic control compared to the newer stuff. And this is 100% rate, so here's full forward cyclic. That's pretty slow. I mean, I'm just jamming the sticks around. So it makes doing stuff like TikToks really lazy. Which is, I mean, that's fine. It's an older heli. It does fly very well though, I mean, really. Come back over here, buddy. Wind is really blowing it around. And, you know, the pitch is not, you can actually hear that ESC bogging down there. That could be from the low RPMs, not sure. And I've got a linear, you know, pitch setup on this, but it doesn't feel linear. I definitely don't like the servos. These are some really cheap servos. Those are gonna go. Especially since I have an open stock flight controller, I can put whatever I want on there. So the servos and the ESC are gonna go 100%. But it is very stable. So yeah, 300 CFX. Never owned one of these, never flew one of these. I wasn't flying helicopters when these were out, but I've had a pretty good time with it so far. I think it's another nice heli. Any of these newer, somewhat modern fly-barless helicopters are honestly pretty good and worth keeping around. The servos and the ESC have got to go. Replace those servos with something better. Even a 3055 would be better than what's on here. And a Talon 25 ESC. That should help with the the tail heaviness as well, because this ESC is huge and it's also behind the center of gravity. So if I got something much lighter like a Talon, it would help out because most of the weight is behind the center of gravity anyway. So you can see there, tail heavy. And that battery is all the way forward, hanging off, and it's still tail heavy. So I could put some weights under there, but it's not, you know, it's unnecessary weight that you don't need. Yes, it would help balance it out, but if I could somehow just reorganize, maybe get a new ESC or something and get that CG better without adding weight, you know, that's not always, you know, adding weight to your helicopter is not great. But the aluminum swash, aluminum grips, all that stuff, it's very similar to like a 270. This 270 CFX is very similar to this, but a little bigger. Super teeny tiny boom. That's probably the smallest diameter boom I've ever seen with a belt through it on a helicopter this size. And because of that really small boom, you've got these tail boom supports, which they look cool. I'm actually a big fan of all the little aluminum pieces. It looks like Horizon really wanted to make this a premium model back in the day. And I think they did a pretty good job. It's got Allen hardware or Hex hardware on it and everything like that. So I like it in that sense. It's very easy to work on and very friendly. So, you know, it's got that going for it. But, yeah, another old blade to the collection. I mean, they even have an aluminum anti-rotation bracket. So, anyway, if you've had one of these, please let me know. And also, if you have had one of these, let me know about your grips. Did it come with a lot of wiggle in it, or did you end up having to shim it? Or does the exploded view just not have the shims in it? I'd be very interested in finding out. All right, guys, thanks for watching.